Shortly before Elizabeth Holmes surrendered to Bryan Federal Prison Camp, she did an interview with the New York Times, and I filmed a live video offering my insights into that interview. And the takeaway was she should fire her PR team. For that to be the final message before going to prison tells me she doesn't get it. Then I insinuated or said, perhaps when she goes to prison, she will begin to get it. And I was wrong. She still doesn't get it, is evidenced by this interview she did with People magazine. And I'm going to cover the interview with some of my own insights into the Elizabeth Holmes experience and why she is enduring a harder experience than she needs to. Welcome, by the way, to the White Collar Advice channel. My name is the Justin Matthew Paperny, married to Sandra, father of two kids, Jason 6, Alyssa 10. Let's get to work and talk about or embrace the reality that it is very difficult to be in prison, certainly serving a very lengthy 11-year sentence. So in no way at all am I diminishing how hard it is for her to be in prison and to leave a visit and leave her two young children. No question. I went to prison at 33. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. It was one measly year. It was the easiest experience you can imagine. So I sympathize. I do not want to downplay it. The problem is her messaging and this opinion she has of herself. Now, I wrote a blog. We're going to go through it. Our team did not work with Miss Holmes. And I think if you see people in our community with whom we work, you see slightly different messaging. They're not victims. They're not blaming. They're excusing. They're trying somehow, some way to become part of the solution rather than seeking sympathy. I look at Massimo from the Varsity Blues case, contributed to our nonprofit. Bill McGlashan. We were in the FTX case with Ryan Salam. Our team had the privilege of working with CZ, the founder of Binance, the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. And while this sounds promotional, I'm sharing it with you because powerful, affluent people can go to prison and they have a choice. They can complain, blame, and excuse and claim that prison is torture and hell, or they can somehow own what happened, embrace the reality this is their life, and become a part of the solution. In no way does she want to become a part of the solution other than happy talk. And you're going to hear me describe why in this video. Let's go through actual quotes, people, things that she said. The people I love the most have to walk away as I stand here, a prisoner, and my reality sinks in. Now, in my opinion, making this statement tells me she wants all of us to focus on her pain, but what about the pain that she has caused others, people who invested, and I don't care if they were rich, they still lost. There's still the feeling of being a victim. So it's okay to discuss the prison visits, but how about in the next vein say, I know I'm here suffering, but as a result of actions taken at Theranos, even if those are actions I don't agree with, people are suffering as well. When you don't mention people who were impacted by your actions that led to a very lengthy federal prison sentence, people will claim you only want sympathy and it is terribly self-serving, and it actually gets you further away from what she wants. So I said in that live video I filmed after she did the New York Times piece, fire your PR firm because you are unable to put yourself in the shoes of people who are sort of judging the length of your sentence, right? How a case manager would view you in prison. But I can tell you, as someone who's been to prison in a minimum security camp, if other prisoners, who many of whom have endured nothing but heartache their entire lives, in and out of the system, intergenerational recidivism, poor, poverty, mental health issues, substance abuse issues. Many of them have been in real prisons, juvenile halls, detention centers, county jails. When they hear her claim that a minimum security camp is hell and torture, it tells me the PR team was not fired. Number two, she still won't own it. Holmes continues to insist that she never committed fraud. Theranos failed, but failure is not fraud. She also claims, I truly did not think I would ever be convicted or found guilty. That arguably is the most horrific thing she said throughout this entire article. And I'll come back to points 3, 4, and 5 in a moment. If you get indicted and you were preparing for trying to negotiate a plea agreement or going to sentencing, one of the first questions you should ask lawyers, if you've taken any defendant to trial, have you ever won? What do the statistics look like? I'm not going to waste time in this YouTube video going through what the statistics are for people who go to trial. Here's the answer. It's really, really high. So for her to somehow think, despite the odds of how few people win at trial, despite the likelihood that she would get convicted and not embracing the reality that she would get convicted, for her to essentially say, let's actually read it again. I truly did not think I would ever be convicted or found guilty, tells me she is unable to embrace the reality of the situation, because here's what successful people who go to trial do. They do what Jerry Lundergan did. Jerry reached out to our team, said, I'm going to go to trial. Odds are I lose because most people lose. If God forbid I lose, I want to begin to mitigate and demonstrate why I'm a candidate for leniency. How can I become part of the solution, even though I'm not accepting responsibility? We mitigate, we prepare. He gets convicted, as most do. The government wants 63 months. He gets 21. President Biden pardons him his last day in office, and they reference our nonprofit because Jerry, for years, contributed to employing and helping the nonprofit grow and influence 1 million people in prison. You can still go to trial, but embrace the idea you most likely lose. So that tells me her lawyers told her she was absolutely going to win, or there was a level of delusion or self-belief or just conviction that there's no way the government would convey a jury that she's guilty of these version of events. That was absolutely astonishing. Let's go on to number 3. She's positioning herself as the helper. She talks about advocating for mothers in prison and working as a reentry clerk. I think that's excellent. I think that's wonderful if she's doing that. But here's the problem. Remember like those Wendy's commercials growing up? Where's the beef? Where's the evidence? See, people will begin to see her differently if she's mentoring, if she's teaching. When these women come home from prison and go on talk shows or CNN or Fox and somewhere and say, y'all have an impression. Ever since I've gone to the South recently, I continue to say y'all. It's kind of a problem. Y'all have an impression of Elizabeth Holmes. I want to tell you what I saw every single day in prison. She didn't complain. It was brutal when she left her children behind, but she recognized that she's going to be home someday. She's so fortunate, she always says, to have a loving husband or fiance or spouse raising those children with resources many of us don't have. She really inspires and teaches. She never said it was hell or torture because it isn't. Oh, she did. I would love for someone to come home and talk about the messaging of Elizabeth Holmes, then follow through on exactly what she said she is doing, helping mothers advocate and working as a reentry clerk. I want to see the evidence. Our nonprofit, for example, we get hundreds of letters a month from people going through our courses in prison. We post the letters. We share the letters as evidence that we are actually having an impact, because it is nothing more than happy talk if you say you're doing something and you don't provide the evidence. We want to see it. Where's the beef? Number 4, she's still the visionary. There is not a day I have not continued to work on my research and inventions. Now, I will tell you, had she worked with our team, this whole thing would have gone differently. Does that sound self-serving? Moss, Bill, so many other people with whom people famous and not famous, when they embrace the right message, things change. Let me read it again. There is not a day I have not continued to work on my research and inventions. There is a God complex here. The idea that there is something so significant to her. And that statement alone, I have not continued to work on my research and inventions, implies this is something she has the capability to do, implying that Theranos was a success when we know that it was not, when we know that many of the things they did, I've covered that extensively. Right? So for her to insinuate that she's continuing to work on these research and inventions is absolutely absurd. So as I wrote here, even in prison, she's making sure we all know she's still thinking big, still working on healthcare solutions. She's setting the stage, I wrote, for her comeback, even before she gets halfway through her sentence. It's fine to think big, but to insinuate that you're going to change the world with these research and inventions totally defies any logic, because she has no history or success or having done that. It would have been better if she said, here's the plan that I'm building. Here's the way that I'm influencing people in prison. Here's the way that I'm making the most of this experience. Here's how I'm documenting my journey to improve my legacy, because someday my young children are going to see it. Instead, she takes this global macro approach as a visionary that somehow, some way she's going to change the world, when there's nothing in her past that indicates she can change the world. Last but not least, she chose a safe audience. Holmes gave this interview to People magazine, a magazine known for human interest stories, not investigative journalism. She didn't sit down, for example, with the journal that exposed Theranos. That's not a mistake. It is a strategy. So in agreeing to this interview, her PR team must have convinced her that this would elicit some sympathy, some support. People might be impressed that she's educating and working as a reentry clerk. What a good PR team would say follows, and this is how I'm going to close this video. Okay. If you're going to prison and you've been convicted at trial, even if you don't agree with the government's version of events, do not complain. Do not focus on yourself and make yourself to a degree a martyr, a victim, And if you're going to talk about that it's hell and torture, at least put yourself in the shoes of people who suffered and talk about them as well, because it continues to be, it had always been about Elizabeth Holmes. And this first message, after a year and a half or 2 years, does nothing to change the perspective that so many people have of her. There's a God complex. She's different. She's a visionary. There is no acceptance of responsibility. And to state that she had no idea she would get convicted tells me how detached from reality she is. That's either her fault or her lawyer somehow convinced her she would prevail despite the evidence. She's back. Let's hope she fires the PR team this time and comes out with different, better messaging moving forward. Time will tell.